Hello, everybody! Welcome back to yet another very exciting episode of the Friends Talking Fantasy Podcast. My name is Charles, and with me today, as always, is my lifelong friend and co-host, Dylan.
I'm ready to talk some fantasy with my friend, Charles.
I am ready to talk some fantasy with my friend as well, Dylan, and not just any fantasy today, because today we are going back to the House of the Dragon TV show. At the time of this recording, episode 6 has just come out. There's been a big casting shift in the show, so we thought that it was only fitting to go back and take a look at the early years with the younger cast and do a recap of the show through the younger actors' arcs, episodes 1 through 5, and we'll talk a little bit about 6, but primarily to focus on this first half of the show where we stand today.
You're right about that, Charles. I'm feeling that nostalgia for the early years already, and that's not to be confused with your band in high school that was called Nostalgia. It's just more of that feeling of nostalgia that I'm experiencing. It doesn't have to do with it.
Thank you for bringing up my high school band. We played rock covers, okay? That's what we call ourselves, Nostalgia. It was very clever. And we were not bad.
Charles, lead singer when it comes to Walk This Way by Aerosmith.
It was Sweet Emotion, actually.
I always say it was Walk This. I always mistake it for a different Aerosmith song. I think at one point I said Dream On, and you were pretty alarmed by the idea of having to hit some of those notes.
Yeah, I can't sing actually for real, so you have to do the songs where they're just talking. But yeah, no, we at the coffee house jam in high school. Look at us already reminiscing, just like we're reminiscing today about House of Dragon. We can't help it. Our minds just go back to those early years with Millie Alcock, of course. I think it was Emily Carey who played the young Alicent. These characters, they're already characters that we're reminiscing about that we miss, and it's only been like just over a week.
Yeah. I'm going to miss them. I really am, all jokes aside. Mm-hmm. I feel like Millie Alcock and Emily Carey did fantastic jobs portraying the two young women, young Rhaenyra, young Alicent. And, you know, we're going to mostly cover 1 through 5 here. We might allude to things in 6 a little bit. So this will be my spoiler warning for episodes 1 through 5, and I'll say 6, at least a little bit, so we can be free to talk. So you might want to turn this down in your headphones if you haven't watched all that and you don't want to hear spoilers. But yeah, I definitely am having a little bit of an adjustment period, trying to get used to the new actors, especially in those 2 roles. And yeah, it's strange. We're going to miss those 2. Such phenomenal performances, right, Charles?
Absolutely. Very phenomenal. It's kind of interesting to recast the show 5 episodes in with a whole new cast. At some level, I'm on board with it. I'm like, let's move the story forward. No need to drag along. I think one of the criticisms I had of Game of Thrones back in the day was like, you guys hear that? That's Riley.
What is squeaking?
That's my dog, Riley, discovering her chew toy right next to me. She's playing right now with her toy by herself. So if you hear...
You'll edit all that out, right, Charles?
Oh, yeah, for sure. We edit everything. We edit every episode here in the Friends Talking Fantasy Podcast. No, I probably won't. So anyway, before I got interrupted by my pups, so yeah. What are we talking about? Game of Thrones, House of Dragon. It's an interesting move, right? To recast the show. But one of the gripes I had about the original Game of Thrones is that sometimes it was like, do we need to see everything? Let's get to the action. And you could tell they were speeding that along in the last couple seasons of Game of Thrones. They were doing that catch-up game. But I think this show decided, as part of how are we going to be different, how are we going to stand out, well, let's get to the goods. Let's speed up this season. It's an interesting play.
Right. And it was jarring when Game of Thrones suddenly switched to this, let's just move through it, the last couple seasons, especially the last season.
Right.
And we're used to this slow burn character development. And then all of a sudden it was like characters were changing episode to episode come season 8.
Right,
and
right.
This, I think, what they are doing that's more successful with the let's move it along attitude is when you know that it's, I mean, this last time skip was 10 years. When you know that much time has gone by, all they have to do is kind of send the characters toward that direction. And you're willing to buy, okay, 10 years has passed and this character is kept moving in this direction in terms of their development. Like the character that most comes to mind for me around that is Kristen Cole, who was shifting allegiances at the time of the end of episode 5, more away from Rhaenyra and toward Alicent. And then when we come back in episode 6, he's full on team Alicent. So things like that, it gets away with a lot better, and it is less jarring. So
yeah,
it's interesting.
Yeah, well said. Yeah,
they're doing it well.
I thought the transition was very smooth. They didn't waste any time. They just delivered it plainly, straight away, and you buy into it quickly. The only, to even call it a complaint is unfair, but the only thing I'm sad about is losing some of these actors. But I'm open to the performances that the new actors can bring, but we'll just have to wait another day to see exactly what they bring to the table. But so far I'm optimistic. I did want to focus this episode on the early years here, Dylan, and now that we're 5 episodes in, just finished episode 6, let's do a vibe check. How are you feeling all across the board here for the show?
Generally I'm feeling really good. I think that the show is doing a phenomenal job of following up Game of Thrones with a prequel that we can all enjoy, be captivated by. I think that the last couple episodes for me, that would be, I guess, 4 and 5 from the perspective that we're trying to talk to, weren't quite as strong as, let's say, episode 3, I thought was great. Just because I think we're getting really into this interpersonal drama in a way where some of the politicking and definitely a lot of the action have been just not as prominent in the last couple. I know it's necessary, but I always prefer, if I had to rank those things, I probably most prefer the politicking. Next for me would be the battles and the action, and probably third is just interpersonal drama, just for the sake of it, without minus the politicking. I feel there has been a lot of interpersonal drama without politicking being a huge part of it.
That's fair. I like what you said, because the show did have the very difficult task of 2 things that a lot of modern TV shows and movies, I think, try and do and fail more often than they succeed. Is 1, make a prequel, which is such a hard thing to do for a popular show. 2, it's basically, you almost can call it a reboot, but continuing the legacy of a popular franchise. We see shows like Star Wars that get the occasional win and the occasional loss. They just can't seem to keep the fans happy all the time. We've gotten a Jurassic Park movie, we've gotten a Top Gun movie. It's so many of these things are coming back, and to do, whether it's a prequel or a sequel or a reboot or this or that, it's always dicey. And I think with a show as controversial as Game of Thrones, the risk was even higher for House of the Dragon, and they are admirably doing a great service to the Game of Thrones community and fans, and they're delivering a show that is a spiritual successor and also doing stuff that's totally new and interesting. A lot of changes that were calculated to be different from Game of Thrones, and a lot of changes that try and keep the show modern and fresh, and I am enjoying all of it. It's interesting that you were talking about the more recent episodes kind of lagging. I'll agree with you. I think episode 5 was probably, of all the episodes so far, the weakest. but I think episode 4 might be my favorite. And there was no action in it, but it was probably at least it was the best written episode, I have to say. Episode 3 was the one where Daemon takes on the crab feeders. Is that episode 3?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
That was a fun one.
Also, if I'm remembering it correctly, it's also the one that has the hunting going on.
Yeah.
It's the first real time skip, and
the stag.
It's got Rhaenyra kind of grappling with these ideas of okay, I am the heir, but now Aegon is kind of, I think he's only 2 or something like that at that time, but he's clearly a presence. He's the male firstborn son of Viserys, and I think with all of that going on, it was really interesting to see how the characters were reacting. I really enjoyed that. But yeah, okay. Episode 4, meanwhile, to remind folks of what was going on there.
The King of the Narrow Sea is what the episode's called.
And this is the one where Daemon comes back, and we get incest, which is always a part of Game of Thrones.
For sure.
I think they get away with it at a level that I think very few shows would be able to get away with now, because people just expect it. It's
right.
oh my God, incest is going on, which I think people are more sensitive to that probably now than they were back when the original Game of Thrones came out. But it's almost like I've seen people just have this reaction of, oh, it's incest. That's very strange. I don't know. It's Game of Thrones.
But I also feel like the way that scene was built up to and filmed and shot and presented was incredibly thoughtful. I know in Game of Thrones, it was always shown to be provocative and to shock you. All of a sudden we have young Bran climbing a tower, and then he peeks in a window, and what does he see? Whoa, full-on incest happening. And so it's very provocative in that sense. But in this episode 4, as much as I was watching through my fingers for some of it because of the whole incest and also taking advantage of kind of weird vibes that were going on, it was really well done. It kind of takes away the provocative nature of 1, the sex, and 2, the incest, and 3 it's one of those complicated scenes where you can't tell who's initiating what and what's really happening, and it kind of keeps you being well, what are we even watching right now? It's uncomfortable, it's weird, and I don't know, I just thought it was really tastefully done and really thoughtfully done. And I remember watching the director, whose name escapes me for that episode, but she was talking in the after the show thing, and she was like, yeah, I just made a scene that you rarely get presented in a way you rarely get to see, but in a way I felt honest, and that felt honest to me. And I could really see that and respect that in that moment. Even though I'm not a huge fan of what actually happened in that scene, I was like, it was really well done. And that can be a hard thing to do, especially today, of how do you broach the topics of, incest or an older relative taking advantage of a younger relative, or things like that. And I just as much as I was watching through my fingers, I thought it was a great scene.
It was a great scene, and that director's Claire Kilner.
Thank you.
I know she was talking in that after the episode thing that they do, and it was cool to see that she was, we have a woman directing this episode and thinking a lot more from the perspective of not overdoing any male gaze aspects, which were extremely common in the original Game of Thrones. So you can tell there's a lot more thought going into how to portray some of these scenes. And
well said.
We've moved away from a lot of that. They used to call it, sexposition, exposition,
Game of Thrones
a portmanteau of sex plus exposition.
Yeah,
right. We don't really see that as much in House of the Dragon, where they just have naked women and mostly on scene just to keep people it's very lowbrow, I guess, how they think of the viewers if they feel like they need to be showing a naked woman to keep them
Game of Thrones is
focused
kind of
when people are
bridging the gap
explaining the
from
world
like paid cable to through the internet streaming, right? Game of Thrones was kind of that crossover show, and a lot of old HBO was like that. You show things you can't normally show on TV, sex and drugs and violence, and Game of Thrones was, a part of that time. I personally, there were some moments in Game of Thrones that I would agree with critics saying like that was over the top. That was, not very, open-minded approach to showing the scene. But other times, it's entertaining. It can be funny. It can be, interesting. But I think when we talk about, being a spiritual successor to Game of Thrones, I think this is one of the really interesting ways that they did that. It's like, how do we tackle the sex position angle of Game of Thrones? We can still go to a brothel and still have like orgies and nudity and stuff like that, but we can focus on this bizarre, never know what's going to happen next force that is Daemon, and what is he going to do in these moments, and what are these characters going to do together now? And that's the focus, and it was just a fresh perspective for all of it. I think we're better for it.
I'll also say the classic sexposition scenes in Game of Thrones were times where I remember one. I might get it slightly wrong. It's been a while since I rewatched the original Game of Thrones, but I remember one where it was Viserys that was Daenerys's brother from the original Game of Thrones,
right?
Not the current King Viserys in House of the Dragon. And he's explaining to, I think, a prostitute, like, oh, there haven't been any dragons in a really long time. And she's just naked. She's just naked. And they're kind of like, I think they're making out or whatever. They're in a bath together, something like that, right?
They're definitely in a bath together in one scene.
Right. I think it was that scene. And I think it was a discussion about like, oh, there haven't been any dragons.
Yeah, I think they're admiring the dragon eggs in the bath and all that. Yeah. I kind of remember that scene.
I don't think it was there weren't dragon eggs yet, because that happens at the end of the first season of Game of Thrones, and Viserys is already dead by that time. Rest in peace.
I thought they always had the eggs. I thought the eggs were gifted to them at the wedding.
You're right. The eggs, they thought they were like
just ornamental.
Hatch, I guess that's what I should say. Yeah, you're correct. I think the eggs just were considered like an ornament at that point. But they probably were looking at the eggs now that you bring that up. And anyway, point being, the purpose of that scene was to get across to the viewer, hey, there haven't been dragons in a really long time. And that could have been expressed in any number of ways.
Right.
And it didn't have to be in a scene where they're in a bath together.
Fair.
And she's topless.
Yeah.
However, the difference in House of the Dragon is being in a brothel with Daemon being in a brothel that he took his niece to, and then making moves to get like sexually involved with her in that brothel. The setting of a brothel and everything that was going on there is central and key to the scene and what's actually happening and what what they're trying to get across for the story. Right. And that's a difference. That's why I don't consider it like a sexposition scene.
Yeah.
It's a scene where that stuff was a critical part of what had to happen if they're telling this story.
Well said. And what even makes it the next level, and why this to me is the best written episode of the season so far, and maybe my favorite episode so far, is not only is that scene well written on its own, but when you look at the overall theme of the episode, it kind of parallels Alicent's journey as a young woman in this world as well, and the sexuality that, like, the weird sexual stuff she's experiencing being the queen to old crusty potentially what's that disease he's got the
grayscale. Do you think it's grayscale? I feel like
I don't know. I feel like he would have been dead by now if it was
he's
grayscale.
Lasting so long.
Yeah.
I mean, since we can discuss a little like episode 6, can we say how shocking it is that this guy is still kicking 10 years after episode 5?
I know, he's gonna outlive them all
constantly. I know. It's like, I can't believe they're still trotting Viserys out there. He's missing a full arm now. He looks like he's like death itself.
I mean, they were bringing out leeches 10 years ago, and he's still kicking.
Yeah.
Pretty amazing.
I mean, surprised the guy has any blood left after all that leech treatment.
It's well said. I have no idea. But it's interesting because at the right before that happens, when they're all like, Daemon returns and they're having that little garden party, and Alicent's like, oh, why don't we tour the tapestries? And they all laugh at her. Alicent and the Rhaenyra are having that conversation, and I love that conversation because, Rhaenyra's complaining, right? She's like, oh, I went on this tour. Everyone just wants to be with me because I'm the queen. It's so annoying having all these people, whatever, in my life. And Alicent's like, it's rare for girls in this realm to get a choice between two suitors, no less a score of them. And she also, Rhaenyra complains, my father seems content to sell me off to whoever has the biggest castle. And then she goes, that's Daemon. There are worse things to be sold off for. So all this stuff is coming out, and Alicent's like, come on, it's romantic that these people are competing for your hand. And she's like, oh, how romantic it must be to be trapped inside a castle only to squeeze out heirs, totally tone deaf to who she's talking to.
Right. Alicent, it's like, obviously she doesn't say anything, but it's like, that's exactly what her life has become. So
right.
It's I like the rift between those two. I think it's been really
right.
Yeah. It starts I guess it kind of
the marriage is when it starts. When you marry your friend's dad, the kind of friendship kind of rocky at that point, if not over, when you become the like
a tale as old as time, Charles. So. Yeah. I mean, you speak about it like it happens all the you're like you've witnessed it 1,000 times. When you marry your friend's dad, it's just really tough to keep the friendship going. I've seen it enough to know.
Yeah. 11 times.
I get 11 times. Nah, it makes a lot of sense. I think I just really I think the rift between Alicent and Rhaenyra is pretty much the focal point of this entire series so far.
Yeah.
And because it is, I'm glad that they've done such a good job of building that over time. And it hasn't been this instant separation between the two where they hated each other right away once the marriage happens. It's actually kind of veered back and forth a little bit since then, with a few efforts to reconcile on, I would say, both sides, even maybe more so Alicent making efforts early on. And then finally, especially post time skip, we've reached a point where it seems irreconcilable.
They're like the biggest contenders. Yeah, the biggest area of tension for sure. Yeah, and it's in this episode that the stark difference in their life situations.
Stark.
There we go. That's right. The stark difference between their ways of life is directly juxtaposed, right? You have the scenes. At first, these scenes are great, and I'm thinking, oh, what a nice guy, Daemon is. He's being like the fun uncle, taking her out in the town, showing her the life, And while she's having fun, Alicent's, like holding a crying baby or being called to sleep with Viserys or all these other considered boring kind of things of being locked away in the tower, right? That's kind of the lifestyle that we see compared to a Rhaenyra, who's basically free at this point because she has kind of shirked her responsibilities, right? Like not committing to getting married and living up to her station and all that. She's still kind of flirting with, I can do whatever I want, I'm free, I'm not responsible to anyone right now. And she starts to learn after this episode, and a lot of episode 5 is kind of about her realizing that she does have responsibilities and she does have to grow up and pick a side, but she holds out, and that puts a strong rift between her and Alicent. And what's good about those moments is you can see both sides of the argument, right? Like Alicent is queen, and when she's speaking to Rhaenyra, she's giving her good advice. Like Rhaenyra, like getting married can be a nice romantic thing. You get to choose who you want to marry. Like this is really exciting, and I only want the best for you in these moments, right? And then on the other side, you have Rhaenyra who goes, for men, marriage might be a political arrangement. For women, it's a death sentence. And remember, her mother was, giving birth until it killed her, right? So she is emotionally scarred from that too. You can see why she would want to just be left alone. And she even says at one point, "Oh, I just want to be left alone." And you're not wrong in that too. It's unfair that in this society she's forced to get married and have kids, and that's like her life for the duty of the realm, right? So that dichotomy between them, what makes it so good is that there's truth on both sides.
There definitely is truth on both sides, Charles, and I think there's this disconnect even between Viserys and Rhaenyra on this idea of doing your duty, where like you bring up there, Charles, she's calling it a death sentence. She has seen her own mother die because of basically being treated like a baby mill,
right?
And then Viserys is like, look, even I had to marry for the realm. Like, everyone does their duty. And it's like, Viserys, you don't understand the difference between you, like, this, however old he's supposed to be, like, middle-aged man marrying, like, young woman of your choice, and then, like, there's no risk to your, like, no physical risk to you.
Right.
And then Rhaenyra, who she's like, okay, if I do this, there's political risk of like, okay, people might have trouble accepting if I marry some, a Lannister, right? There was a scene where the Lannister was trying to make his move on her.
Look how they keep dumping on the Lannister guy.
Yeah, right. I actually thought that was like a great casting for the Lannister.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah,
he's doing a good job.
I thought he was a great Lannister. And then, what was I? So, she marries a Lannister, and then, she's on the Iron Throne, and she's supposed to be the queen. He's supposed to be, they call it like the king consort, right? That it's going to be a big adjustment for the folks in Westeros to see, oh no, the Lannister man who's right there on, like, maybe not sitting on the Iron Throne, but he's a ruler in some way. The king is in the name. We're not supposed to see him as a king. We're supposed to see this woman as a king. That's an adjustment. So there's political threat, and of course the bodily threat that you were mentioning before, Charles. She literally could die from trying to produce heirs.
And I think that's well stated at the end of this episode, where Viserys and Rhaenyra are talking about the scandal that's coming out, and then Rhaenyra's like, "Oh, come on! Like, if you were out, like, any man could go out and sire 100 illegitimate bastards, and no one would care." And he's like, "Yeah, exactly. But you were born a woman, okay? You have these things you need to fight and overcome." And
the scandal being the, like, people thinking that she had sex with Daemon.
Coupled, I think, was Otto Hightower said.
Coupled, right.
They were coupling.
He was trying to be sensitive to...
He really didn't want to say it. He's like, don't make me say it.
Which, he's like, you can figure out what I'm saying. These two got up to.
Another favorite part of this episode is Viserys, a rare moment of authority from Viserys, where he's like, speak plainly, and he does a bunch of other things this episode too, where he finally, like, lays down some law in amongst his house.
Oh, he like kicked the crap out of a hungover Daemon as well, and he was like banished him. Although of course, like, a Viserys banishing, it's a very light banishing because you can just show up for a wedding later.
Yeah, you can come back later. It's fine. It's a temporary
for
thing.
a big event.
Right.
A wedding. It's we can make some exceptions to banishing someone forever.
Yes, you tried to take advantage of my daughter at one point, and you admitted it to my face. But it's the wedding. You gotta sit at the table at the wedding. So, and then, he has that hard conversation with her. It's like, the truth doesn't matter. It's all about the optics, right? It's all about the image, and that's one of the burdens of being king. You have to have the accountability for not just your actions, but also for how people will perceive, for perception, I think is what he says, perception. So I think that was kind of a wake-up call for Rhaenyra as well, this idea of like, we aren't born equally. We all have different sets of biases in society that we have to overcome, men and women, right? And especially in royalty, when you're royal and you have that duty to the realm that's kind of larger than yourself. And I think he brings out the dagger again and talks about the Song of Ice and Fire again in those moments too.
Oh, yeah,
like,
he did.
He's like, this is a greater responsibility than
enough of it.
Whether you marry someone you like or not, okay? So you're going to marry the Valyrian and you're going to like it. Which I also admired from, it's like, you should have done that so long ago. Like, if only you had done that from the beginning.
Yeah, that might have saved some trouble because things get out of hand pretty quick after she nearly couples with Daemon, who is Daemon is unable to follow through because he starts feeling like he lost control of the situation as soon as she starts showing actual interest in coupling. And right, and he ends up having to leave because the whole thing for him was this like power play, this dominance. So to see her actually like, oh no, I'm down, rather than taking advantage of her, Daemon not up for that. So that doesn't speak well to Daemon's character.
Nope.
And then she comes back and she might not have coupled with Daemon, but she's pretty quick to start coupling with Criston Cole.
This was an interesting one where it's like, you almost kind of are like, oh, this is a better match than what we just saw. I still kind of, and this is a great performance by Millie Alcock here, where she's bordering that line between, okay, is this someone who's just been like, who's still processing this like sexual emotional abuse they just went through and is still confused, or is this like someone who's looking to get into trouble, or is this someone who's looking for like a genuine connection? Like, she borders that line of innocence and confidence and all of that really well in those moments. I wasn't quite sure how to feel about their coupling either after what we just watched earlier on in the brothel.
Yeah, the power dynamics are tricky between her and Criston. They were pretty obvious between her and Daemon in terms of like he was abusing his power over her. But when it comes to Criston, it's like he's actually not supposed to couple with anyone because he's King's Guard, and that's an important role to him. And he's for years at this point been the person who's supposed to listen to whatever the princess asks of him. So it's actually her in a lot of ways that has a lot of power over Criston.
For sure.
Yeah. And I think he was definitely interested in her. That's probably been lingering for a long time. But I think he, for multiple reasons, felt powerless to resist that she wanted to go ahead and do some of that coupling. And we get this long scene and like taking off the armor. I don't know what you think of that whole thing.
It was another long.
I don't know if we needed.
Yeah, I was like, oh god. And I was like, again, kind of watching through my fingers a little bit. I was like, okay, like more.
I know you're so squeamish, Charles.
Well, I probably wouldn't have been if I hadn't. The incest thing caught me a little off guard, but the rest of it wasn't nearly as bad. But
right, who could have expected in a Targaryen show to end up seeing incest? I mean,
just because you're expecting it doesn't make it any less uncomfortable sometimes. But it's a great scene. I mean, no taking away from what was made.
The parts Charles was able to see between his fingers were fantastic.
I watched it a second time in preparing for the episode, and I did a good job. And yeah, it's the power dynamic plays interesting, and that moment sets Christian Cole on a tailspin, and that goes in like episode that pays off in episode 5, and then now you see his allegiance shift in episode 6, and it all stems from him being, like you said, confused and like almost in this paradox of like, do I do what the queen kind of orders me to do and what I want to do, or do I do what my order says I have to do? Like, what do you do when those contradict? And, you know, poor Christian Cole, he's from outside the Westerosi politics, and I guess his view of life is much simpler. He's like, oh, let's run away together and eat apples. Yeah. And she's like, what are you talking about? And he's not at that
apples
level.
Apples were not as big a sell as he thought they were.
No, it didn't. The play didn't work. Honestly, it's kind of an appealing offer if you ask me. But yeah,
not Targaryen.
Someone who genuinely believes in that is just gonna get chewed up by the machine that is Westerosi politics. And poor Christian was, pretty on the edge there until Alicent comes in and saves him from himself in some of those darker moments. But yeah, it's interesting how that kind of continued to, I'm going to say evolve, but it's really, I guess you could say degrade. is the bond between Rhaenyra and Christian Cole.
Definitely. And let's talk more about the Kristen Cole arc, really, from episodes like
we're here
3 through 5. And I'll say too, for the listeners, in case you're only listening to this one, you're like, why are they so focused on 3 through 5 and not 1 or 2? That's probably because we already recorded like full discussions on episode 1 and episode 2, so you can
didn't we also do 3
if you haven't yet. No, I don't think we didn't do 3.
Interesting. Okay, I thought we did.
We did not do 3, Charles.
Oh, oops. I could have sworn we did. Oh, whatever.
No, let's look at. Anyway, they don't want to hear us work through logistics.
No, they don't.
So, anyway, point being, I'm curious to get your thoughts on some of this Kristen Cole stuff, because it's actually the part I probably ended up feeling most critical about of these last few episodes, just in terms of between what felt almost like melodrama of when he's just very quickly like in love with her and he wants to run away. He's like crying. It's like well, this happened really fast. To then, I think like the acting of him at the wedding, where then I don't know, I just wasn't really buying that he was this guy who was like on the edge of just having a total explosion when it comes to him just pummeling that guy into the dirt.
Yeah. It's
Joffrey. Oh, crap. I forgot, yeah.
How could you forget that it was Joffrey?
How could I forget? Yeah, those Joffreys don't fare too well at weddings.
No, they do not. But,
right.
Yeah, I kind of agree. Like, I don't mind the actual, like, on paper, what happens to Christian Cole arc. I like the idea of a more startlingly innocent guy who worked really hard, came from nothing, buys into his virtues as a Kingsguard knight who gets totally destroyed by the system just by being this innocent, pure kind of guy and going with the people he trusted and liked, and them just abusing him, taking advantage of him to then commit these acts of violence and work against them. Like, I do think that's a really interesting arc. It's kind of, and the fact that it's a man, I think, is interesting too. It's because if it was a woman, it's kind of like takes away from it a little bit. I like that there's this like kind of we see so much in this show about what it's like being female in the world of House of the Dragon. So I like that there's a guy going through this like potentially sexual assault, definitely being taken advantage of in some way, and how he's processing that as well. And he just internalizes it and acts out in these violent moments. And I'm all for that. But where it fell short for me, like the whole wedding, gotta be honest, episode 5, if the pacing to me, it almost felt like we were watching like a play, kind of. It felt very dramatic. It felt very a bit over the top for me. And like, why would Christian Cole like talk, like let Joffrey talk to him? But not even provokingly. It's like, hey, you and me, buddy. We're cool.
Sorry,
like we both have a mutual interest here in like being cool, right? Like, you know, we're in the same boat. Mm-hmm. This is me like introducing myself, and we're gonna be working together quite a bit. We're gonna be seeing each other quite a bit. And cheers, mate. And then he leaves, and then Christian Cole does nothing, and then all of a sudden later, off camera, there's screams happening, and he's beating him up, pummeling him to death. That was a lot to happen off camera and in that short amount of time. And I think I agree with you. I think that's what you were expressing earlier. Yeah, totally agree.
Yeah, and Charles, thanks for bringing up the idea that Joffrey was kind of extending an olive branch, if anything.
That's how I read into it.
That's how I read too. I was like, okay, he could have gone about that in a more deft way, right? In a way that was more empathetic toward Cole and been a little bit more like kind of how you were expressing.
But he didn't know their relationship,
hey, we're in
really.
This together, where like he kind of approached Cole. And you know what else is a little bit clumsy? Is the idea that Joffrey can just look across a crowded room and see the look in Kristen Cole's eyes and be like, that guy's having an affair with the princess. I'm 100% sure, and I'm gonna act on this. And Corlys was like, you've got pretty good vision.
Yeah,
I'm
sure he found out, and there's like a couple ways he could have potentially
not how it's played,
found
though.
Out, but
it's not played that way, Charles.
But it's like, just look at him. Like, he's love-struck, which is not the word they said. They said a word we won't say, but he's like, he's love-struck.
I don't remember what word they said.
It was the C word.
Oh, okay.
I'm pretty sure he's just like C word struck, which we won't say.
Oh, wow. Okay, that's not happening on FTF.
Definitely not. Definitely not.
Nowhere near that.
Nope.
But I feel like, okay, so if he found out another way, they could have had him, but not a lot of people knew at that time. It was like only Alicent. Or did she? Yeah, she learned that before, right?
Alicent, and before it was also the, what's his face, the son of the new Hand of the King, who's got the cane. He knew.
Oh, you're talking about, Strong. Is it Jorless Strong? Something like that?
That sounds right. It's the Strong family.
I know Strong.
So he probably knew, and I wouldn't put it past him to tell anyone in Viserys's, Valyrian's.
Larys Strong.
I would not put it.
Larys.
Larys. I wouldn't put it past Larys to whisper things over the Valyrian table about it, but we don't see that. We don't know that's what happened. But him and Alicent, the king, Otto, they're the only ones that know, besides Rhaenyra and Christian himself.
No, but the king didn't know that it was Kristen.
Oh yeah. That's true.
The only people who knew it was Kristen Cole. I mean, I think it was
the only one that knows for
Alicent
sure is Alicent. Yeah.
Right.
Because she's like, we need to talk about Rhaenyra, and then he just immediately spills the beans, and Alicent got more than she was bargaining for in that conversation, for sure.
She's like, did something happen? Like, I know you're outside that door. Did something happen? And he's like, it was me. I did it. Please,
the allegations are true.
He's like, please murder me quickly and don't torture me. He's like, I pray for execution. Like, Kristen Cole wanted to die so badly in this episode, and Alicent just wouldn't let him.
Refuses.
And so I don't like, if there was a way where they could have gotten it where he heard it through the grapevine, great. But I don't like it's clumsy to me that he looked across the room and just saw it in
the guy who's charged to guard her with
Kristen's
his life,
eyes.
like it's a bold move for sure. Yeah. That was
so
weird.
Then
You go ahead.
Right.
Yeah.
He walks up to him, and he could have done it, like we were saying, in a more deft way. He could have been empathetic, like, hey, I can relate. I'm in a similar situation on the other side of this marriage, but you and we're going to be in this together, and I'll look out for you. Like, that kind of stuff. And he sort of does that, but just in a more smarmy way.
Mm-hmm.
And I know that Kristen Cole really was not in the mood to take anyone's crap. All that being said, like you were getting at, Charles, I don't know where the transition happened from Kristen hearing that it's a generally positive remark, and then he's just pummeling Joffrey in front of everyone.
During the...
I don't know. It's the whole thing. That was the most clumsy part of the whole series so far for me.
I agree that it was pretty clumsy, and as much as I applaud the pacing of the show, that felt a little quick. Is Sir Kristen Cole's decline. Like, he got his heart broken, and we bought that, but from heartbroken to die by death sentence, acting out, violent person, very quick. And it's a progression I'm definitely open to. I think it's an interesting progression, this idea of, like, acting out your, like, after internalizing all of this trauma and, like, being thrown in and just eaten alive at the hands of politics in this court, right? To just acting out in the most simple way possible, brute violence, punching a guy to death. It's effective. I am open to it, but there wasn't that much to gain by killing Joffrey. Like, that wasn't a character we cared about or were interested in. They showed one, like, nice, intimate scene with Joffrey, but it's still, like, that was only a few minutes ago. You don't really care about who this guy is. He holds no political intrigue. His death did not send shockwaves through all these political alliances, like when they teased Viserys collapsing at the end, which was kind of corny, if you ask me. Again, read like a bad play where it's like, and then the king collapses, or like the wine spills into the blood or whatever it was, and it's like fade to black. You're like, okay, we could have done better than that, guys. Sorry, but anyway, like that would be a shocking death where it's like that kicks off a whole bunch of political intrigues. Joffrey's death kicks off nothing, and I don't know. Like, to me, it was just kind of it just struck me as odd, the whole pacing of that scene at the wedding. But it did lead to Viserys finally being like, no, we're just getting them married, because of course before this whole thing of what were they going to do? It was like 7 days of tournament and feasting. Like 7 days of tournaments and feasting. That's all Viserys knows how to do, is throw tournaments and
every time Viserys is like, oh, there's going to be this big tournament, it's like, oh no, something's going to go terribly wrong.
This is like the third tournament that he was trying to start, but because there was the hunt, which you could consider a tournament.
Sure.
Then the tournament of his son's birth, who wasn't even born yet.
The hunt went a little better than the rest of it. They didn't get the white stag they were looking for, but they did get a stag. There's a little thing where Rhaenyra ran off with Kristen, but overall that went a lot better than the other two attempts. But
exactly.
Can we last comment I would make about the parts of this episode 5, which I agree was probably the weakest so far, that felt somewhat clunky. And I think some of it, they weren't giving enough credit to the viewer.
I know where you're going with this.
I think that stood in stark, nailed it, stark contrast to episode 4, which I thought gave a lot of credit to the viewer, where it's like figuring out what happened with Daemon in terms of why he couldn't follow through, in terms of all of the times where Rhaenyra's lying and saying one thing, Daemon's lying, saying another thing. They never just spell it out for you what happened.
I know exactly where you're going with this, because it made me so mad when I watched it. I was like, you know what, man? F this episode, for real. Like, when they said this to me,
I hope this is the right
it is, dude.
Okay, where he's like, this is a quote from our buddy that we just remembered the name of, Laris Strong.
Yep.
Is this right?
Yep, this is it.
Where he's like, so there's this big moment. Alicent shows up late. And shows up in her green dress.
So annoying.
And we get this moment where Laris leans over and he's like, do you know what color the... I don't have the exact quote.
I have it.
Do you know what color... Okay, can you say it, Charles?
I'll ask you the question you can answer. The beacon of Hightower. Do you know what color it glows when Old Town calls its banners to war?
Green?
Did you watch that after the episode too?
Yes.
Where the
yes,
guy,
I was going to talk about that. Can I talk about it?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. Because I watched after the episode, and the guy, showrunner or whatever, he's like, it was really subtle what we did there with the
I wonder if the audience got it.
We did explain it, yeah. He's like, we did explain it in a line of dialogue explicitly and clearly. However, no, he didn't say clearly, just like, we did explain it in a line of dialogue. However, it's still really subtle, and I'm curious to see
and then they played that scene again.
Are able to... It's like, I'm curious to see how many viewers were able to pick up on this really subtle thing we did.
That
like,
low-key pissed me off.
It's like, you think we're all really, really dumb, don't you?
I was like, was this show written by 6 different people? Like, what is this? Like, the episode 4 we got was so rich with,
I know,
like, metaphor and juxtaposition and, like, thought-provoking scenes, not just of dialogue, but of actual imagery. And then this is like, obviously she comes in late and interrupts the wedding, and she's wearing green, and she's marching.
Her house colors too.
Alicent's doing a great job of like owning it, being the queen, like boss queen, like walking through the wedding, right? And I knew, okay, she's obviously directly defying the king in this moment on purpose. The whole thing. Where's Alicent? Ooh, where's Alicent? She's making us all wait. And then she interrupts his speech mid-sentence to make this entrance. And then you dare.
And not wearing Targaryen colors, even if you aren't plugged in on the Hightower situation.
It was a very bright color that stood out from everyone else. Obviously, the outfit was a huge piece of it, whether you knew the colors or not. The outfit stood out. Like, the actress did a fantastic job of translating that through her performance. The costume designer did a fantastic job of making it stand out through her art, or their art of making a costume, right? It's all there, beautifully done. You don't have to say. And then they insult my intelligence. They insult me at the base level.
Yours particularly, Charles.
I felt personally attacked. I'm like, I don't like this Laris character, and I don't like whoever wrote this episode, because I don't like the way I'm being treated right now. This is not fair. I didn't sign up for this, okay? I'm the same guy that watched episode 4 and 3 and 2 and 1. Like, give me some kind of credit. I had to, when I watched it the second time, I was like, I need to get that quote exactly, because I want to say it again on the air, because this was the thing that annoyed me most in television in months.
Wow.
I was so annoyed by it. It was like not fair. And then the after thing where the guy's like, I don't know if the audience got it. We did say it explicitly in dialogue. And then they showed the scene again. I was like, that's too much now. You can't say you don't know if we got it after you explicitly say it in dialogue. Oh, I can't even think about it. It makes me so mad. Yeah, that was an annoying line of dialogue scene.
I mean, I don't think it will go down in infamy at the same level, but I really feel like this deserves meme level infamy at the same level as the like Daenerys kind of forgot.
Yeah.
The famous after the episode from like Benioff and
could
Weiss.
Forget.
You know that one. I think this offended me more.
Oh, way more offensive. Because like characters can forget stuff, even if that is obviously not what happened. Like, it's fine. Like, plausible deniability there. But you can't say, oh, I wonder if the audience got it, when you hit us over the head with it, and then you show the scene again. I'm insulted. Yeah. I'm insulted. I'm sorry. I'm due an apology, and at least the next episode was good. At least episode 6 was good, but Yeah, that was inexcusable. I did not like that at all. The beacon of Hightower. Do you know what color it glows when old? And then he asks the question, like, "Do you know what color it glows, guys? Do you know?" It's like, yeah, we can guess. That is green.
Take a guess.
I'm gonna guess green. Okay, that's Mr. Strong. That's gonna be my guess. Ugh, so annoying. So annoying. My favorite part of that episode, though, I feel like I have to say nice things now. To dial it all back, because that scene, agreed, horrible.
That's about as critical as we've gotten on House of the Dragon by a long shot.
By a long shot, it's a great show.
Reminder: we love this show.
We do,
but I mean that moment deserves the flack.
It deserves the flack. How dare you wonder if I understood that when you say it so explicitly? There's a lot of things you can wonder if I understand or not. Okay, a lot of things, but not that. So to cut it back...
I mean, yeah, if they just... Sorry. If they were just like, look, we're a little worried that people wouldn't understand if we just... Like this after the episode
right.
in the interview. If he was like, we're a little worried people wouldn't understand it. So we did get this line of dialogue out there that we know might be on the nose. But it's important that people understand this. Then it's not so bad. I mean, it's still like, okay, that was like
that line still sucks. You shouldn't have done it.
But we can move on.
But I appreciate that you acknowledged it and accepted accountability for it, right?
But even if this is
and also, wouldn't it have been more interesting?
I think of the.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly.
It's like this is how lowly I think of our viewers. Where I still am not sure if they're going to get this after we explained it explicitly.
This is how we end up getting like zombie polar bears and the whole like trapped in the middle of the ice in Game of Thrones.
Yeah,
this is how they think this low of us that we would accept this. But it also wouldn't it have been more interesting if there was that dialogue scene was completely taken out and there's just the queen marching, and then it's after the episode, it's like, yeah, we wonder if fans know that, the Old Town lights their banners green when they go to war. Then it's like, I could have assumed that from looking at it, but maybe I don't keep track of all the colors. It's like, oh, okay, that's at least a piece of trivia that you're telling me afterwards. Even that would have been better than what they did. And I got to be honest,
that would have been great.
Yeah, I mean, because it would have actually been something interesting and a piece of trivia. We would have actually learned something. I think that's my biggest issue with the after the episodes. It's not really a behind the scenes. They don't really give you more that much. They just kind of explain what we already saw. I'm like, teach me something new, guys. Come on, show me something. Give me something. I haven't really quite found those entertaining yet. Just gonna come out.
I also think Viserys still, even with all the exposition, I still think Viserys didn't understand
he probably
what the dress symbolized.
No idea. He just let
he's like, wow, Alicent, she looks great in green.
Yeah, she lets Alicent go all over, disrespect him at every turn in that meeting, and
especially after the time skip.
Oh yeah, but even now, where she's literally walking up to her uncle, and her uncle's like, "Old Town stands with you, my queen." And it's like, this is happening right in front of you. Meanwhile he's cutting his goose aggressively, not doing anything, and the goose is flopping around on his plate. You're like, what is this guy doing?
We've got Daemon showing up, and
he could literally go to call a guard over and say, grab her by the arm and bring her to the table, and don't make sure she doesn't get up. And he could have done that. And he would have saved so much face doing that. Not that I'm thinking it would be the right thing to do to another human being or anything, but if I was him, that's what I would have done. I'd have been like, sit down, you're not getting up. And I wouldn't have made her late either. I would drag her in, this is too crazy. But he's not thinking that. He's like, we'll have 7 days of feasting, and everyone's going to love it. Everyone's disrespecting him at every turn. Daemon's sitting there disrespecting him. Alicent's there disrespecting him. It's like, come on, man. Get your head out of that goose or whatever it was. Quail.
But Charles, I remember you saying there's something you liked about this episode that you wanted to get into.
Great seg, Dylan. There certainly is. The very beginning of this episode, well, not the very beginning, because that's with Daemon and Rhaenyra Rice, which was an okay scene. I liked it. But my favorite is probably with Otto and Alicent. that conversation they're having in the rain where Otto's leaving. He was fired in the last episode, which I think was the right move, by the way, to fire him. If I was Viserys, I would have fired his ass a long time ago. But
I love how you're going with fired.
He was fired.
Sure, I just don't think fired is in the lexicon in Westeros, but
yeah, the severance package didn't look that great, not gonna lie.
Right.
The severance package looked really weak. He's standing out in the rain, about to get dragged out of town. But, he kind of scares Alicent with the truth, and he doesn't even, like, go one side or the other. I thought this scene was really good dialogue, where he's basically like, Rhaenyra will put, like, there's one point where she's like, I don't want you to leave or whatever. Like, why is this happening? And he goes, you chose Rhaenyra, like, right out of the bat. And this was really, I think, like, Alicent's last moment before she grew up. I think she needed these moments to be like, you made the mistake of trusting Rhaenyra over your family. That's the first thing you did wrong. Rhaenyra will put the sword to you and your children. She'll have no choice. Not that he thinks Rhaenyra is an evil person who wants to kill her kids. It's literally like, look, these are the facts, kid. You got to look past your relationship with Rhaenyra to see that this is going to end in one of two ways. And he goes, so either prepare your son to rule or go to Rhaenyra and plead for mercy, because those are your only two options now. And Alicent is crying. She's scared. Another great performance. And, it's a really powerful scene. And then I think she takes those lessons and internalizes them, and that's how we get the dress that she wore, which Dylan. It's the color green, which the beacons of Old Town light their beacons green when they call their banners to war. That's why she wears it.
That's why she wore green.
Exactly. Exactly.
Okay. It's all connected.
The banners of Old Town, man. So yeah, that is a fantastic scene. Loved it.
And Old Town must be where the High Towers live.
That's right.
Oh.
And they're calling to war, which means that she might be, going up against Rhaenyra and Viserys and all these other people. I think she's ready to stake her claim to the throne, man.
Oh, like a war, like when people are opposing each other.
Yeah, this is a metaphorical war in politics, not so much a bunch of soldiers fighting each other. Yeah. They should have written that into the line. I think what's his face should have gone a little bit
more.
He's like, green. It's like, yeah. It's like, but no one's fighting right now. It's like, no one's fighting. It's a metaphor for her standing up for herself in front of her husband and her friend, who's also the heir apparent. And it's like, oh, okay.
Yeah, we needed clarification.
Because they do say a bunch of times, it's like, Rhaenyra's gonna be the queen, and her son's gonna be the king, and your son should be the king but isn't. It's like they do say that about 20 times this episode, also. So, point delivered. But the best time it was done was Otto acting against Alicent. Great scene, great performances, well written. All of it was beautiful.
Yes, and Otto's point was certainly delivered as well to Alicent.
Yes.
That is a fantastic scene, the acting like you mentioned. Otto, so I might totally mispronounce this, Rhys Ifans, I believe. That's a person that plays Sir Otto Hightower. And I feel like he's one of the strongest actors in the whole show. Yeah, he's killing it, right?
He reminds me of Tywin, where he just has that authoritative presence. Like, you buy that this is a very smart, politically strong, confident man. And I like that about his performance. But he's got this compassion to him. I even like when he's scolding her. He's not even saying kill Rhaenyra. He's like, you either need to kill her or you need to beg for mercy. Like, he's still giving options. He's not letting bias come into play. He's not vengeful anyway. He's just being practical about what has to happen. He's being very real with her. And that can be scary when you're faced with two really tough choices. But it's important to hear. And I think he straddles that. He's like a compassionate Tywin, right? Where it's like, you could beg for mercy.
Because he even gives her like a little hug at the end, if I'm remembering correctly.
Yeah.
It's like there's true empathy, compassion, and fatherly, paternal love.
For sure.
Heading her way in that scene. And such a delicate line for an actor to walk. Mm-hmm. Like, you so easily could play that as this like non-caring, political.
You chose Rhaenyra, and now I'm in the rain.
He's mad.
Yeah.
You know I hate the rain, and umbrellas aren't invented yet.
Yeah, this is your fault, Rhaenyra. Or this is your fault, Alicent.
Oh, yeah, true. But yeah, he straddles that line extremely well. Like you said, he gives options, but he's right. Mm-hmm. And he knows, look, you have a little Aegon Targaryen running around. Aegon, that's the name you went with. Yeah. Like the Conqueror, like the first Targaryen to come over here and unite the Seven Kingdoms.
Right.
That's the name you went for. And if you think for a second that down the line, Rhaenyra is just going to be cool with a little Aegon Targaryen, who's the firstborn son of the last king, running around, and she's not going to be basically forced to put your kids to the sword. Mm-hmm. You're just being naive. Yeah. And it sucks, but I think he's right. Yeah. And
she was being very naive.
Oh, 100%. Mm-hmm. Yeah, 100%. I mean, there's things she could have still done, like in terms of being balanced between Rhaenyra and her dad, that wouldn't have been like inherently naive. Mm-hmm. But the way that she did approach it, I think, was totally naive. And I think she's like, what's interesting, Charles, is we won't get too much into episode 6, but it's cool to see Alicent then give like the same speech to her son Aegon, mm-hmm. which, by the way, I mean, I just gotta say, what the hell was going on with that scene where she walks in on him and he's,
at the window,
he's taking care of him. Yeah, he's at the window. He's right where Tom and Baratheon, rest in peace, went down. Right? It's like, I was looking at that, I was like, this is, what's going on here? The last time I saw a silhouette of a boy standing over there, he was taking a drop.
Man, what a powerful scene that was. I mean, that was a fantastic episode of Game of Thrones, by the way.
We watched that one together.
We did. We were literally standing up being like, what is happening? Multiple times. Beautiful work of art that episode was. But yeah, that's
one of the last great episodes of Game of Thrones.
I think it may have been. Yeah, that was a beauty.
Yeah.
Truly incredible. But
I mean, that's one where Cersei takes down the set, right?
Yep. She blows up the set with the
wildfire.
Yeah. Right. Tommen jumps out the window. Or like.
And anyway, we get a lot of deaths that were extremely impactful all at once in that episode of Game of Thrones. And I think to bring it back to House of the Dragon, that's a place where the time skips actually have kept us from getting that same level of impact mm-hmm. from the deaths that we used to from Game of Thrones, where, like you were saying, Joffrey just kind of comes in and then he's dead.
Yeah.
And it's like, oh, okay, I guess that happened. And we get a bunch more of those in
like
episode
Daemon's
6,
wife
where characters
kills his wife. Like, we meet her and then she dies.
His wife.
Like, okay.
Oh, you're talking about,
in episode 5, the beginning of episode 5.
Daemon wives keep dying, so I'm just trying to keep track.
Yes, I can see where you were confused with that. It's Daemon's wife,
was a similar
Rhaenyra. Rhaenyra.
Yes.
She was great. Yeah, I knew you couldn't finish. Yeah, come on, that's a great last line.
Oh, yeah, for 2. Especially after episode 4. So it's he's already having some problems with impotence, and
she said the wrong thing.
She really hit
I
him
probably would have kept my mouth shut. It looked like she was going to get away with her life
too.
Intact, but she went for it, and it was entertaining. You gotta love her for that. But the showman in her just couldn't resist. But
it's interesting. He showed up in like a weird old Obi-Wan Kenobi.
It was a really weird looking hood. It was like really big.
Right. It's like, what are you doing, man?
I did find the fit to be a bit distracting. I was like, this is some kind of fashion I'm not gelling with right now. But props to the actor, Matt Smith, for still pulling off a honest performance in that.
Oh, yeah. I mean, he's done incredible this whole series. I'm glad I'm glad that he's making it through the time skip.
Yeah, he didn't get
I'll also
aged
say
out.
for some reason, yeah, Kristen Cole just doesn't age because I feel like he's relatively young, and they're just like, you know what? He just looks the same.
He
10
gets a
years later.
pass.
These
He
other
gets a
people-
pass. Matt Smith gets a
Right.
pass. Viserys gets a pass, but we need to put him in lots of makeup.
Yeah, Viserys didn't quite. I mean, the actor kept going, but to get a pass, I mean, that guy really. How much time is that guy spending in the chair?
Yeah.
With them putting the makeup on.
Yeah, I mean, he's
that guy
going
did not
through
get a
it, yeah.
pass.
You're right.
Yeah,
But
but
what are we talking about?
Kristen looks exactly the same. The time skip.
The time skip.
We're talking about the actors.
Yeah.
and the time skip.
Okay, the time skip and the investment in the characters. Right.
Right. Oh, sorry. Going back to the actual point, it's about the impact of the deaths and how we kind of get introduced to characters, then they're killed off. It happens very quickly, and I think something that has been missing from this House of the Dragon season so far is an actual like really impactful death. Besides, like the way a character dies has been impactful in terms of I'm thinking about the original Queen. Her death was impactful.
Oh,
in the
yeah,
sense of,
yeah,
like,
yeah.
What happened was so
Because it's so graphic and
horrible.
horrible. Yeah.
But in terms of do we care that much about, it was like Emma basically, but spelt weird.
Right.
Like, do we care about her as a character that much? Not yet, because it was the same thing. Like, she'd just been introduced. It was the first episode. So I feel like that's been... Game of Thrones was so famous for these deaths. Anyone can die, and when they do die, it hits you so hard. And they just
It's a tall order. That's a really hard thing. If you could do that reliably, then you could make tons of money and have a great show. I just think that just goes to show you how strong Game of Thrones really was, and that work was by George, where it's just so much that happened in that was so incredible and provocative and shocking and intriguing, and that's a hard thing to live up to, and we'll see where the show's going. I mean, the characters that we have had, we're now watching them age and have children of their own. Like, it's very interesting. I like the dynamic. It reminds me a lot of the series we're reading by Joe Abercrombie right now, where like you skip generations and like knowing how the past generation lived and who these new generation of characters are. Like, it's a really interesting narrative dynamic that I'm excited about this show going into. It was really well done in Joe Abercrombie's work. I'm talking about The Age of Madness, but for those of you that haven't read it, that's a good one. But even going just to see in House of the Dragon, it's like, this is an interesting change for our characters, and I'm excited to see where it goes.
Yeah, as a character in Joe Abercrombie's First Law series says, the seeds of the past bear fruit in the present. And it's interesting to see the seeds of the past, the turmoil and all of this succession, all these succession issues, and the just really, most of all, the relationships between Alicent, Rhaenyra, Kristen Cole, and all that mix. It's interesting to see those seeds bearing fruit in the present generation of the time skip, where you've got all these kids who they pretty much have inherited the feuds of their parents.
Alicent's like, do you think you'll stay your playmate forever? It's like, whoa, okay. Like, here we go.
Yeah.
We're planting those seeds, man. Like, right here. You're being born into this feud.
Exactly. And I feel for them because Aegon, for example, clearly he's got some things to work out based on his some of his behaviors. But he's also... like in that moment, he was showing not a lot of interest in the throne or anything. He's like, oh, then I just won't, like, I won't cause any issues and then we'll be fine.
Yeah, exactly.
You're so naive, like, passing down what her father said to her. So we're just seeing generations passing down, in some ways, trauma, in some ways, feuds, and in some ways, advice. And we'll see how that all turns out in the long run. but
right.
I think right now is probably a time to close the book on the early years.
I will agree. You know, there's an interesting line that happens in episode 5 where Viserys and Lord Corlys are discussing the terms of the betrothal between Rhaenyra and I forget his name, the Targaryen son, and they're like, well, obviously,
the Targaryen son.
I mean, Valyrian's son, and the one that Rhaenyra marries, and they go, oh, well, you know, if they have children, their last name would be Valyrian, and Viserys is like, surely, Lord Corlys, you're not proposing the Targaryen dynasty end with my daughter simply because she is a woman. And that could be a sentence you can take in passing in context and being like, oh yeah, he doesn't want his heir's last name to be not Targaryen. But my keen, read a lot of fantasy ears perked up.
Yeah, the same ear that had you understanding the complexity at play when it came to Alicent's green dress. Yes. That ear tuned into something else here, Charles.
I turned into something else because it may be more literal than that, you know, as a foreshadowing element of the Targaryen dynasty ending simply because Rhaenyra is a woman. And that certainly was an inciting incident for all of these things. And surely the Targaryen dynasty won't end because of all that, but you don't know. And that's the uncertainty we're going into in these later years episodes. But it certainly does close the book on the early years. And
well,
I think it's...
Yeah, luckily there's lots of tension around what will happen with the Targaryen line because we have no idea what happens 200 years in the future right. at all.
Yeah,
it's prequel problems.
Yeah, prequel.
And we're also super invested in them passing down the Song of Ice and Fire.
Yeah, that's
let
that go.
Even though we know that won't happen.
It wasn't even interesting in Game of Thrones, let alone going to be interesting in this prequel. Right. The prophecy was barely mentioned. No one cared about the prophecy in the show where it was actually happening. Whatever.
Yeah. I mean, it was Arya, right?
Totally.
Apparently.
Well, I think we've talked enough about the first half of House of the Dragon. Looking forward to the second half, of course. Great performances. These actors will be missed. I am telling you. I really enjoyed the performances of Alicent and of Rhaenyra. Those two actresses are going to be sorely missed. But I'm ready to give new actresses and actors opportunities to thrive in their roles too. So I'm open to it.
For sure. And I feel like those two actors are gonna be fine.
Yeah,
I mean, I feel like this was kind of cool, I think, for them from a career perspective, where they got thrust. I mean, they're both very young. Mm-hmm. They got thrust into this spotlight in this show that's setting records for viewership, and now they kind of go out on top, and they can go do probably whatever they want. They're going to be so in demand now. So I'm excited for both of their careers, and
Me too.
I'm also excited to move forward with House of the Dragon with these new actors.
Well said, and we'll have to come back again and finish our conversations. Will they explain more heavy-handed metaphors to us? Who knows? Maybe they will, maybe they won't.
What dress will Alicent wear at the next wedding?
Will they explain it once?
Why will
they
it
explain
it
twice? Will they remind us again about why, the whole relationship between Rhaenyra's son and Alicent's son, and why that's a problem? Maybe they'll say it for the 200th time in episode 7. But we'll never know.
After the episode, will they remind us again and just insult our intelligence directly? Stay tuned.
Stay tuned. I'm excited. I can't wait. Think of me, guys, when you get to that after the episode, just in case, because I'm watching it with you.
Charles will be watching.
I'm watching it with you. I'm reacting with you guys. We suffer collectively and we celebrate collectively, I would say as well. Mm-hmm. So, speaking of celebrating, why don't we celebrate with a little sweet, sweet outro music?
Let's get that sweet, sweet outro music pumping, Charles.
All right, here we go. Thank you, everyone, one and all, for listening to yet another very exciting episode of the Friends Talking Fantasy podcast. If you like what you heard today, let us know over on social media. Dylan's doing a great job there, interacting with everyone that comes by, answering questions, giving recommendations, receiving recommendations. We're always there, and that's over on Instagram at the FTF Podcast and Twitter at the FTF Podcast with a number 1 at the end. Now, Dylan, if they like what they heard today and they want to support the show even further than following us on social media, what can they do?
Toss 5 stars to our podcast, and we're especially asking all you awesome folks on Spotify to throw us 5 stars. It's super easy, just 2 clicks at the top of that page of all our episodes. So gonna be really, really awesome if it's over half of you that are listening on Spotify, if you're able to help us out there. Also, Apple Podcasts, you can throw us 5 stars and even a review if you like. But just listening is more than enough. Thank you so much for doing that.
Thank you all so much for listening. You guys are the best. Dylan, do you think that, do you know what song we play when we're ready to end the show?
The sweet, sweet outro.
We play the sweet, sweet outro. Do you think all the listeners at home understood that? I know we said we were going to play it and then we played it, but I hope they got it. It was subtle in how directly we said it.
Well, you see, you did this thing where you were like, oh, I think it's time for the sweet, sweet outro music. Yeah. And just in case they didn't get it, I was like, get that sweet, sweet outro music pumping.
Okay.
But I'm glad that this, after the episode, we're ensuring that we explain again. And it was really subtle, so I'm not sure if our listeners will get it.
Well, that's just going to have to be a little bit of tidbit of trivia, FTF trivia for the true fans that listen to the end, because there's no other way to really know. It's asking a lot to interpret that information. But, guys...
That's why we always do these after the episode discussions.
That's funny. We should have ended it and then done an after the episode and explained it. That would have been funny. Maybe we record that later. That has some legs. I don't hate that.
Would be funny.
Like an after the episode recording session released on just a thing on Twitter or something. That's funny. I should get like a red jacket and a brown leather coat.
I mean, we could also just like a video of it.
I don't know if we can get fancy enough for video, but it would be funny.
I think it'd be... I mean, we could always just have the outro music stop, right?
Yeah.
And then we come in with the discussion. Like that, and we can even just use what we just had.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. We could end it and then do like the after episode thing. But, well, guys, the song's ended, so see you later. Goodbye.
Bye. Wait, did you say go forth and conquer?
Oh my God, I didn't say that. And as always, friends. Oh my gosh, what a 180 episode streak, and I almost didn't finish. Oh my goodness,
I saved you there.
Whew, thank goodness.
Well, yeah. I mean, there's a joke to be made with the didn't finish, with the thing that happened to Damon's wife, but I don't have it.
Unlike Damon, I always finish the episode. And I always finish it with my catchphrase. All right, friends, thanks for listening. And as always, go forth and conquer, friends.